The millionaire elderly couple went undercover as tenants until the maid protected them from their own son. The slap echoed through the cramped apartment hallway like a gunshot. "You're nothing but trash," Marcus Okonkwo snarled, his designer suit jacket swinging as he raised his hand again toward the trembling young woman pressed against the peeling wallpaper. "I should have you arrested for even speaking to me." "Stop!" The command came not from the maid cowering before him, but from the elderly man emerging from apartment 3B, his weathered brown hands steady despite his 72 years. "Leave her alone." Marcus whipped around, his face contorted with rage. "Stay out of this, old man. This doesn't concern you." But Kwame Okonkwo, though Marcus didn't know it, was looking at his own son for the first time in 3 years. And what he saw made his heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. 3 weeks earlier, Kwame and his wife Abena had made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone in their social circle. They were worth over $200 million, owned a pharmaceutical empire that employed 12,000 people, and lived in a mansion that had been featured in Architectural Digest. "Are you sure about this?" Mr. Palmer asked, adjusting his smudged glasses as he slid the papers across the desk. His office smelled of stale coffee and desperation. "I mean, it's clean and safe, but it's not exactly upscale." Abena smiled, her elegant features softened by genuine warmth. At 68, she still carried herself with the grace that had first caught Kwame's eye nearly 50 years ago. "It's perfect. We're looking for something simple, quiet." What she didn't say, what they couldn't say, was that they were looking for the truth. 6 months ago, their son Marcus had taken over the day-to-day operations of Okonkwo Pharmaceuticals. It should have been a triumphant moment, the culmination of decades of grooming him for leadership. Instead, reports had begun trickling in. Complaints from employees about hostile work conditions, whispers of cost-cutting measures that bordered on dangerous, and then, most troubling of all, an anonymous letter delivered to their home. "Your son is not the man you think he is. He treats people like disposables. He's destroying everything you built, and he's doing it with your name. Come see for yourself." The letter had included an address. This address. Palmer Property Management handled several of their buildings in the lower-income neighborhoods, properties Marcus had insisted on acquiring as investment opportunities. Properties where, according to the letter, Marcus conducted his business with an iron fist and a cold heart. So Kwame and Abena had done something they'd never done before. They'd gone undercover in their own empire. "You'll be in 3B, Mr. Palmer," continued, handing over a set of keys. "Your neighbor in 3A is a young woman named Amara. Sweet girl, works 3 jobs, keeps to herself mostly. And 3C is empty right now, but Mr. Okonkwo, the son, you know the owner's name, he uses it sometimes for meetings." Kwame's hand tightened on the keys. Marcus used an apartment here? For what? The building was exactly as grim as they'd expected. Peeling paint, flickering hallway lights, a pervasive smell of mildew mixed with cooking spices. But the tenants they passed seemed kind, if exhausted. A mother juggling grocery bags and a toddler nodded at them. An elderly man sweeping the stoop offered a gap-toothed smile. This was reality for so many people. Reality that Kwame and Abena had spent their lives trying to improve through fair wages and ethical business practices. Had they failed? Had their own son perverted their mission? Apartment 3B was sparse but clean. 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, a bathroom with rust stains in the tub. Abena set down the single suitcase they'd brought. They couldn't exactly arrive with Louis Vuitton luggage, and sank onto the worn sofa. "I'm afraid of what we're going to find," she whispered. Kwame sat beside her, taking her hand. Whatever we find, we'll face it together, like we always have. That first week, they learned the rhythm of the building. Amara in 3A left at dawn each morning, her footsteps quick and light. She returned late, sometimes carrying books. Nursing textbooks, Kwame noticed when he'd held the door for her one evening. She'd thanked him shyly, her dark eyes tired but kind. "Are you new here?" she'd asked. "Just moved in," Abina had replied. "I'm Abina, this is my husband Kwame." "Amara," the young woman had said, offering a small smile. She couldn't have been more than 25, with the kind of beauty that came from genuine kindness rather than artifice. "If you need anything, I'm right next door. Well, when I'm here, I work a lot." "3 jobs, we heard," Kwame said gently. Amara's smile faltered. "The rent here isn't cheap, even if the building is. But it's close to the hospital where I'm training, so—" She shrugged. "We do what we have to do, right?" After she'd disappeared into her apartment, Abina turned to Kwame with tears in her eyes. 3 jobs, studying to be a nurse, and our son is charging her how much for this place? They'd looked up the records that night, using a burner laptop they'd purchased for this investigation. Palmer Property Management, Marcus's division, was charging Amara $1,800 a month for her 1 bedroom. In this neighborhood, in this condition, the fair price should have been half that. It was theft, legal but immoral. But that was just the beginning. Marcus arrived at the building for the first time on their 10th day there. Kwame and Abena heard his voice echoing up from the lobby, sharp, demanding, cruel. They crept to their door, opening it just a crack. "I don't care about your excuses," Marcus was saying to Mr. Palmer, who had apparently been summoned. "Rent is due on the 1st. Today is the 5th. That's 5 tenants who need to pay late fees or they're out." "But Mr. Okonkwo, Mrs. Chen's husband, just lost his job." "Not my problem. Business is business." Abena's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Kwame felt rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to remain still, silent. They needed to see more, understand more. Marcus strode down the hallway, his expensive shoes clicking on the cheap linoleum. He stopped at apartment 2C and pounded on the door. "Chen, open up!" An older Asian woman answered, her face pale with fear. "Mr. Okonkwo, please, I have half the rent. My husband has an interview next week and—" "Half isn't full." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm sending the eviction notice now. You have 72 hours. "But we have nowhere to go. My granddaughter—" "Should have thought of that before you decided not to pay." Marcus turned away, dismissing her completely as she began to cry. Kwame had to grip the doorframe to keep from storming into the hallway. This wasn't business. This was cruelty. And this was his son. Over the next week, they witnessed more. Marcus screaming at maintenance workers for taking too long on repairs. Marcus threatening to call immigration on a Colombian family despite having no actual grounds. Marcus making crude comments about female tenants, including Amara, who he'd apparently noticed coming and going. "That one in 3A, they heard him tell Palmer one afternoon, "she's behind too, right?" "Only by a week, sir. She had some medical bills." "I don't care if she had the plague. Money is money." "She's a good tenant, very respectful." "Then she can respect me by paying on time." Marcus paused. "She's pretty, though." "Maybe we can work out an arrangement." The suggestion in his voice made Kwame's blood run cold. That night, he and Abena sat in their dim apartment, holding each other. "We raised him better than this," Abena wept. "Where did we go wrong?" "I don't know," Kwame admitted, "but we can't let this continue." The confrontation came sooner than they expected. Amara's rent was now 2 weeks late. She'd been picking up extra shifts, trying to cover both her bills and her younger sister's school expenses, something she'd mentioned to Abena in passing. The young woman had no idea that the elderly couple next door were actually the owners of the entire property empire. No idea that they were gathering evidence of their own son's corruption. Marcus arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and this time he came with a sheriff's deputy and eviction papers. Amara was in the hallway, returning from a shift at the hospital. Still in her scrubs, her bag heavy with textbooks, she froze when she saw Marcus. "Mr. Okonkwo," she said, her voice small, "I'm going to have the rent. I get paid Friday. You were supposed to have it 2 weeks ago." Marcus thrust the papers at her. "Eviction notice. You have 48 hours. But I've never been late before. Please, I just need a few more days." "You need to learn that actions have consequences." Amara's eyes filled with tears, but she held her head high. "I've been working 3 jobs, trying to finish nursing school, taking care of my sister. I'm doing everything I can." "Then do more." Marcus turned to the deputy. "Make sure she's out by Thursday." That's when Kwame stepped out of his apartment, Abena right behind him. "Excuse me," Kwame said, his voice carrying the authority of 40 years building a business empire. "I couldn't help overhearing. Perhaps we could discuss this reasonably." Marcus looked at him with disdain. "This doesn't concern you, old man, doesn't it? We're all neighbors here, community." "Community?" Marcus laughed, cold and sharp. "This is business. She signed a contract. She's in breach. End of story." Amara was trembling now, tears streaming down her face. Abena moved to her side instinctively, putting an arm around the young woman's shoulders. "Please," Amara whispered, "I'm begging you, just a few more days." Marcus stepped closer, invading her space deliberately. "You want to beg? Maybe we can work something out after all. You're a pretty girl. I'm sure we could come to an understanding." The implication was clear, disgusting, unforgivable. And that's when Amara did something remarkable. Despite her tears, despite her fear, despite everything stacked against her, she straightened her spine and looked Marcus dead in the eye. "I would rather sleep on the street than compromise my dignity for a man like you." The slap came fast and vicious, snapping Amara's head to the side. "You're nothing but trash," Marcus snarled, raising his hand again. "I should have you arrested for even speaking to me that way." "Stop!" Kwame's command froze everyone in the hallway. He moved forward, placing himself between Marcus and Amara. "Leave her alone. Stay out of this, old man. This doesn't concern you." "It concerns me very much." Kwame's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "Because I'm Kwame Okonkwo, and you, Marcus, are my son." The color drained from Marcus's face. The deputy took a step back. Even Amara gasped. "Dad?" Marcus' voice cracked on the word. What are you doing here?" "Discovering the truth." Abena stepped forward, her elegant bearing suddenly apparent even in her simple clothing. "We received a letter. It told us what you'd become. We didn't want to believe it." Marcus's shock transformed rapidly into defensive anger. "This is a setup? You've been spying on me?" "We've been witnessing you," Kwame corrected. "Witnessing how you treat people. How you've perverted everything we built." "I've been running the business efficiently." "You've been running it cruelly." Abena's voice shook with emotion. "We taught you about profit, yes, but we also taught you about people, about dignity, about fairness." "The world isn't fair," Marcus shot back. "You two are so naive, living in your mansion, thinking everyone deserves kindness. This is business." "This is exploitation," Kwame said quietly, "and it stops now." Marcus's face twisted with rage. "You can't do this. I'm the CEO. You signed over operational control. But we never signed over our majority shares. Kwame pulled out his real phone, not the cheap burner. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting. As of this moment, you're suspended pending investigation. Wait, before their fate changes forever." If this story of love and danger has already captivated you, comment which character intrigues you the most. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected twists, subscribe and join our storytelling community. The most intense chapter is about to begin. Now, back to the plot. Marcus lunged forward, but the deputy stepped between them. "Sir, I think you need to calm down." "This is my company!" Marcus screamed. "Mine! I've worked for years." "You've worked to inflate your ego and your bank account," Abena said, her voice breaking. "But you've lost your humanity along the way." Marcus looked between his parents, his face cycling through emotions: rage, disbelief, shame, and finally something calculating. "Fine," he said coldly. "Take the company, but you'll regret this. I know things that could destroy you both." Kwame felt his blood run cold, but he kept his voice steady. "If you have legitimate concerns about business practices, we'll address them. But if you're threatening us, not threats, facts." Marcus smiled, ugly and sharp. "Did you really think I didn't know about the offshore accounts? The creative accounting from the early years? You two aren't saints. You're just better at hiding it." Abena's hand found Kwame's. They'd made mistakes in the early days of the company, when they'd been desperate and scrambling. Minor tax deferrals, aggressive but legal loopholes, nothing criminal, but nothing they were proud of either. "We've corrected every questionable practice from our past," Kwame said firmly, "and we've paid back every penny with interest. There's nothing to find because we already found it ourselves and fixed it." Marcus's confident smile faltered. "You're lying." "We're not. 5 years ago, we hired an independent audit. Everything we'd done wrong, we made right." Kwame stepped closer to his son. "Because unlike you, Marcus, we believed in accountability, in redemption." For a moment, just a moment, something cracked in Marcus's facade. His eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I just wanted to make you proud, to be strong like you." "Strength isn't cruelty," Abena said softly. "We're proud when you show compassion, when you build up instead of tear down." "That's weak," Marcus whispered, but his voice lacked conviction. "That's human." Kwame reached out, but Marcus jerked away. "Don't." Marcus straightened his jacket, rebuilding his armor. "You want to suspend me? Fine. But don't expect me to come crawling back, begging forgiveness." He turned and strode down the hallway, his footsteps echoing like hammer blows. The deputy looked uncertainly at Kwame, who nodded. "You can go. There won't be any eviction today." After the deputy left, Kwame and Abena turned to find Amara staring at them, her hand still pressed to her reddened cheek. "You're the Okonkwo's," she whispered. "The real Okonkwo's." "We are," Abena confirmed gently. "And we are so sorry for what our son did to you, to everyone here." Amara shook her head slowly. "Why would you live here, in this building?" "To see the truth," Kwame said. "We suspected something was wrong. We needed to know." "And now you do." Amara's voice hardened slightly. "So what happens to us? To me? I still can't pay rent until Friday." "The rent you've been charged is unconscionable," Kwame said firmly. "We're reducing it by 40%, retroactive to when Marcus took over management. You don't owe anything. In fact, we owe you a refund." Amara's eyes widened. "I don't understand." "You've been overcharged," Abena explained, "along with everyone else in this building. We're going to make it right." Tears spilled down Amara's cheeks again, but this time from relief and disbelief. "I've been so scared, So tired. I didn't know how I was going to keep going. Abina pulled the young woman into a hug. You're not alone anymore, I promise. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Kwame and Abina remained in apartment 3B, but now openly as they worked to unravel the extent of Marcus's mismanagement. What they found was worse than they'd imagined. Marcus had been systematically inflating rents across all their properties, pocketing the difference into personal accounts. He'd cut maintenance budgets to dangerous levels, leaving buildings with broken heating, faulty wiring, and mold issues. He'd intimidated tenants into silence with threats of eviction, deportation, or worse. The pharmaceutical side of the business wasn't much better. Cost-cutting measures had compromised quality control. Employee benefits had been slashed. Several key researchers had quit, citing hostile work conditions. Marcus had taken their legacy and twisted it into something ugly. But they also found something else: Amara. Over the weeks of their investigation, the young woman had become their unlikely ally. She connected them with other tenants, helped them understand the daily struggles people faced, and provided insight into Marcus's tactics. He preys on people who feel powerless, she explained one evening, sitting in their tiny apartment with a cup of tea. He knows we're all too scared to fight back, too tired, too desperate. You fought back, Kwame observed, when he tried to proposition you. Amara's jaw tightened. I'd rather have nothing than lose myself. My mother always said that dignity is the one thing no one can take from you. You can only give it away. Abina looked at this brave young woman with something like wonder. Your mother sounds wise. She was. Amara's voice softened. She died when I was 19. Cancer. We couldn't afford the treatment she needed. Kwame felt the words like a punch to the gut. His pharmaceutical company should have been making treatments affordable, accessible. Instead, under Marcus's leadership, they'd prioritized profits over patients. I'm sorry, he said inadequately. That's exactly what we built this company to prevent. Then maybe it's not too late to get back to that. Amara leaned forward, her exhaustion replaced by passion. You have power, resources. You could actually change things. It was exactly what they needed to hear. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Kwame and Abina spent that time gathering evidence, talking to employees, and rebuilding trust. They also spent it getting to know their tenants, really know them. Mrs. Chen, the woman Marcus had tried to evict, was a former engineer who'd fled China after speaking out against corruption. Her granddaughter was at the top of her class, dreaming of becoming a doctor. The Colombian family Marcus had threatened were legal residents who'd come to the country 20 years ago and now ran a small catering business. Their empanadas, which they'd shyly offered to Kwame and Abina, were the best they'd ever tasted. And there were others, so many others, each with a story, each doing their best to survive in a system that seemed designed to crush them. Marcus had seen them as numbers, as revenue streams to be optimized. Kwame and Abina saw them as people. 2 days before the board meeting, Marcus appeared at the building again. This time, he came to apartment 3B, knocking firmly on the door. Kwame answered, unsurprised. He'd been expecting this confrontation. Can we talk? Marcus asked. He looked terrible, unshaven, disheveled, the polish gone. Come in. Marcus stepped into the small apartment and stopped, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. People actually live like this? He murmured. Yes, they do. Marcus sat heavily on the worn sofa, his head in his hands. I've been thinking about what you said, about what I've become. Abina emerged from the bedroom, her expression guarded but not unkind. And what have you concluded? That I'm a monster, Marcus's voice cracked. I convinced myself I was being strong, being smart, but I was just being cruel. Realization is the first step, Kwame said carefully, but it's only the first step. I know, Marcus looked up, and his eyes were red-rimmed. I came to ask, is there any way back, or have I destroyed everything beyond repair? This was the moment every parent fears and hopes for, when their child finally sees their mistakes and asks for help. There's always a way back, Abina said softly, but it requires real change, Marcus, not just words. Action. I'll do anything. Will you? Kwame sat across from his son. Will you apologize to every person you've hurt? Will you work to make restitution? Will you accept consequences? Yes. Marcus didn't hesitate. I'll resign from the board. I'll do whatever it takes. We're not asking you to resign, Abina said, surprising both men. We're asking you to learn, to grow, to become the man we always believed you could be. Marcus stared at her. After everything I've done? You're our son, she said simply. We don't give up on family. The board meeting was intense. Several members were shocked by the revelations about Marcus's management. Others, Kwame suspected, had known or suspected, but had been too comfortable with the profits to ask questions. We built this company on a foundation of ethical business practices, Kwame told the assembled board. We seem to have lost our way. It's time to return to our roots. He outlined a comprehensive plan, rent reductions across all properties, increased maintenance budgets, improved employee benefits, and a complete overhaul of their pricing structures for pharmaceuticals. This will cut into our profit margins, one board member protested. Good, Abina replied firmly. We've been making obscene profits by exploiting vulnerable people. It's time to make reasonable profits by serving them. Marcus sat silently through most of the meeting, but toward the end he stood. I want to say something, he cleared his throat. Everything my parents have said is true. I prioritized money over morality. I hurt people, and I'm sorry. The room was silent. I know sorry isn't enough, Marcus continued, so I'm proposing this. Demote me. Put me in a junior position where I can learn from the ground up. Let me work directly with tenants, with employees, with the people I've harmed. I want to understand what I did wrong and how to make it right. It was Amara's idea, actually. She'd suggested it to Kwame 2 days ago during one of their evening conversations. He needs to see people as people, she'd said, not from a boardroom, but face to face, in their homes, their lives. The board voted. Marcus was removed as CEO, but kept on in a newly created position, Director of Community Relations. He would work directly with tenants and employees, addressing concerns and implementing improvements. He would report to Kwame and a board committee with strict oversight. It was a second chance, but one that required proving himself every single day. 3 months later, Kwame and Abina were back in apartment 3B. Not as investigators this time, but as hosts. They'd decided to keep the apartment, using it as a regular retreat where they could stay connected to the communities they served. Once a month, they lived there for a week, meeting with tenants, understanding their needs, and keeping their finger on the pulse of reality. Tonight, they were hosting a dinner. Mrs. Chen had brought dumplings. The Colombian family brought empanadas and arepas. Amara brought her famous banana bread, made from her mother's recipe. And Marcus was there too, looking more relaxed than Kwame had seen him in years. He'd spent the last 3 months working 16-hour days, not in a corner office, but in apartment buildings, community centers, and employee break rooms. He'd listened, he'd learned, he'd apologized, over and over. And slowly, painfully, he'd begun to change. Tell them the news, Marcus said to Amara, smiling. Amara blushed. It's not that big a deal. It absolutely is, Abina insisted. Fine, Amara grinned. I graduated. I'm officially a registered nurse, and I got a job at Memorial Hospital. The apartment erupted in cheers. Mrs. Chen hugged her. The Colombian children danced. Kwame felt tears in his eyes. There's more, Marcus added. We've established a scholarship fund for tenants in our properties who are pursuing education or training. Amara helped design it. We're calling it the Second Chances Scholarship, Amara explained, because everyone deserves one. She looked at Marcus as she said it, and something passed between them. Not romance, but understanding, respect, forgiveness. Later, after everyone had left and the apartment was quiet again, Kwame and Abina stood on their tiny balcony, looking out over the city lights. "Do you think he's really changed?" Abina asked softly. "I think he's changing," Kwame replied. "That's all we can ask for." "We almost lost him, lost everything." But we didn't. Kwame pulled his wife close. "We learned something important. Wealth and power can insulate us from reality. They can make us forget who we are and who we're meant to serve. So we keep coming back here," Abina said, "to remember." To remember, Kwame agreed. Below them, the building's lights twinkled like earthbound stars. Behind each light was a person, a family, a story. Some struggling, some thriving, all doing their best. And now, finally, they had a landlord who saw them not as revenue streams, but as people. The next morning, Kwame woke to a knock on the door. He opened it to find a young girl, no more than 8, standing in the hallway. "Are you Mr. Kwame?" she asked shyly. "I am." "My mama says to give you this." She held out a hand-drawn picture. It showed a family standing in front of a building with a huge heart drawn around them. At the bottom, in careful letters, "Thank you for caring." Kwame's throat tightened. "What's your name?" "Sophia. We live in 2C. My grandma is Mrs. Chen." "Well, Sophia, would you like to come in for some cookies? I think Mrs. Abena just made some." Sophia's face lit up, and she nodded eagerly. As Kwame settled the little girl at their small table with milk and cookies, Abena emerged from the bedroom, already smiling at their young guest. They spent the next hour listening to Sophia talk about school, her dreams of becoming a teacher, and her grandmother's stories about China. This, Kwame thought, was what wealth was truly for. Not luxury cars or mansions or power, but this, the ability to make a child feel safe, to give families hope, to build communities where people could flourish. They'd almost lost sight of that. Marcus had completely lost sight of it. But they'd found their way back. That evening, Marcus stopped by, now a regular visitor. He'd formed an unexpected friendship with many of the tenants, particularly with Amara, who'd become an unofficial advisor on his community outreach initiatives. "We need to talk about Building 7, he said, settling onto the couch. "The heating system is worse than we thought. It needs a complete overhaul, not just repairs." "Cost?" Kwame asked. "Significant, but necessary." "We can't have families going through another winter with intermittent heat. Then we do it right," Kwame smiled at his son. "I'm proud of you, Marcus, for seeing what needs to be done." Marcus looked uncomfortable with the praise, but pleased. "I'm trying. Some days are harder than others. I catch myself thinking in the old ways, profit margins, efficiency metrics. Then I remember Sophia, or Mrs. Chen, or any of the others, and I recalibrate." "That's growth," Abina said gently. "Not perfection, but progress." "Speaking of progress," Marcus said, his tone shifting slightly, "I wanted to talk to you both about something. A proposal." Kwame and Abina exchanged glances. "Go on." "What if we expanded this model? Not just keeping this apartment, but actually living among our tenants in different properties on a rotating basis. Not undercover, but openly, making ourselves accessible, understanding their needs firsthand." It was a radical idea. Most business owners moved as far from their customers as possible, insulating themselves in executive suites and exclusive neighborhoods. "We'd be vulnerable," Abina observed. "Yes," Marcus agreed. "But vulnerability breeds connection, and connection breeds understanding. I've learned that these past few months." Kwame considered it. The practical part of his brain saw the challenges: security concerns, time management, board resistance. But the idealistic part, The part that had built Okonkwo Pharmaceuticals on a dream of accessible healthcare, saw the profound value. Let's pilot it, he decided. Start with 1 or 2 properties, see how it works. Marcus grinned, and for a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to follow Kwame around the original pharmacy, asking endless questions about everything. There's something else, Marcus said, his expression turning serious. I've been talking to some of the employees who left the company, apologizing, explaining the changes we're making. A few want to come back. But they want guarantees that things are really different. What kind of guarantees? Abina asked. Oversight, a workers' council with real power to raise concerns and hold management accountable. Transparent salary structures, protected whistleblower policies. These weren't just good ideas, they were revolutionary for a company like theirs. You've been thinking about this deeply, Kwame said. I have, because I realize now that power without accountability is just tyranny, even well-intentioned tyranny. They talked late into the night, planning and dreaming. Slowly, Okonkwo Pharmaceuticals and Properties were transforming from profit-driven enterprises into purpose-driven ones. The profits would come. Good business practices ensured that. But they'd come as a result of serving people well, not exploiting them. 6 months after that first confrontation in the hallway, Amara invited Kwame and Abina to her graduation ceremony. Not from nursing school, she'd completed that, but from a leadership program they'd established for employees and tenants who showed exceptional potential. Marcus had nominated her. She's brilliant, he'd told his parents. She sees systems-level problems and creates practical solutions. We'd be idiots not to cultivate that. So Amara had spent the past months working part-time with the company, while maintaining her nursing career, helping redesign their tenant services programs. She'd created a healthcare navigation service, helping residents understand and access their medical benefits. She'd established a childcare co-op, allowing parents to support each other. She'd built community. At the graduation, Amara stood before a small crowd of her peers, other tenants and employees who'd completed the program, and spoke. When I first met Mr. and Mrs. Okonkwo, she said, I was terrified. They were these legendary figures, and I was just a struggling nursing student who couldn't pay rent on time. But they taught me something important. Everyone has value. Everyone has something to contribute. We just need opportunities and support. She paused, looking directly at Kwame and Abena. They also taught me about second chances, about how people can change, can grow, can become better versions of themselves. Her gaze shifted to Marcus. Sometimes the people who need second chances the most are the ones who seem like they need them the least. After the ceremony, as people mingled and celebrated, Mrs. Chen approached Kwame with Sophia in tow. I wanted to thank you, she said, her English still accented but clear. When Marcus tried to evict me, I thought my life was over. Now Sophia has a safe home, I have a part-time job in the building's new community center, and we have hope. You gave yourself hope, Kwame replied, by persevering, by staying strong. Maybe, Mrs. Chen said, but you gave me the chance to use that strength. That night, back in apartment 3B, Kwame and Abena reflected on the journey. We could have lost everything, Abena said quietly. Our son, our company, our legacy. But we didn't, Kwame replied, because we chose to see the truth, even when it was painful. And because a brave young woman stood up to our son and protected us, from him and from ourselves. It was true. Amara's courage in that hallway had been the catalyst for everything. Her refusal to compromise her dignity, even in the face of power and threats, had forced the confrontation that revealed Marcus's corruption. But it had also revealed his capacity for change. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Abena asked, giving Marcus another chance. Kwame considered it. "I think we did the human thing. And yes, I believe it was right. He's proven himself day after day." "He has," Abena agreed. "He really has." A knock on the door interrupted them. It was late, nearly 10 o'clock. Kwame opened the door to find Marcus standing there, looking agitated. "What's wrong?" Kwame asked immediately. "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. That's the problem." Marcus paced into the apartment. "I just got off a call with the board. They're thrilled with our numbers. Community satisfaction is up, employee retention is up, and somehow, despite all our reforms, profits are actually up too." "That's good news," Abena said, confused by his distress. "It is," Marcus agreed, "but it's also uncomfortable, because part of me, this dark little part, is relieved that doing the right thing is also profitable, and that makes me feel like I'm still that same person, still driven by money." "You're human," Kwame said simply. "Being relieved that good work is sustainable isn't the same as exploiting people for profit." "How do I know the difference?" Marcus asked, his voice almost desperate. "How do I make sure I don't backslide?" It was a profound question, and one that Kwame had grappled with throughout his career. "You stay connected," he said finally. "You live here, among the people your decisions affect. You listen to Amara and Sophia and Mrs. Chen. You remember what it felt like to see yourself through our eyes that day in the hallway. And you forgive yourself," Abena added. "Not for what you did, that requires making amends, but for being imperfect, for struggling, for needing to learn." Marcus nodded slowly, then sank onto the couch. "I never thought wealth would be so complicated." Kwame laughed softly. "Wealth is power, and power is always complicated. The question isn't whether you'll make mistakes. You will. The question is whether you'll catch yourself, correct course, and keep trying to do better." They talked until midnight. 3 generations of Okonkwo ideals and struggles distilled into honest conversation. It was messy and uncomfortable and real, so different from the sanitized board meetings and polite dinner parties that had once defined their family interactions. It was also healing. A year after that confrontation in the hallway, Okonkwo Pharmaceuticals and properties had been transformed. Rent across all their properties had been reduced to fair market rates with hardship provisions for families facing temporary difficulties. Employee satisfaction scores had quadrupled. They'd launched several new initiatives: a grant program for small businesses and their properties, a community college partnership for workforce development, and a healthcare access program that provided free or reduced-cost medications to those in need. The profits were lower than they'd been under Marcus's aggressive tactics, but still healthy. More importantly, their impact was measurably positive. Lives were changing, communities were thriving. Marcus had grown into his role, becoming a bridge between the boardroom and the streets. He still struggled sometimes, still caught himself thinking in the old ways. But he'd built a network of advisors and friends, including Amara, who'd become the director of community engagement, who kept him grounded. The anonymous letter that had started everything was framed now, hanging in Kwame's office. A reminder that truth, even uncomfortable truth, was a gift. They never found out who'd written it. "Does it matter?" Abena asked once. "No," Kwame decided. "What matters is that someone cared enough to try to save us from ourselves." On the anniversary of that first confrontation, they held a celebration in the courtyard of the building. Tenants brought food, children played, and someone had strung up lights that twinkled in the evening air. Sophia, now 9 and full of confidence, gave a speech she'd written about how her family had gone from nearly homeless to thriving. Mrs. Chen teared up with pride. The Colombian family performed traditional music, and people danced. Amara stood with Marcus, watching the celebration. They'd become close friends, bound by their shared experience of transformation, hers from struggling student to community leader, his from cruel executive to compassionate manager. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked her. "Standing up to me that day? You could have compromised, kept your apartment, avoided all that pain." Amara shook her head firmly. "I'd make the same choice 1,000 times over. Dignity isn't something you can mortgage for convenience. And look what came from it. All of this." She gestured at the celebration, at the community that had formed and flourished. "All of this," Marcus repeated softly. "I almost destroyed it before it could exist." "But you didn't, and now you're building it," Amara smiled at him. "That's what matters. Not who you were, but who you're becoming." Kwame and Abina watched from their tiny balcony, arms around each other. "We should have done this years ago," Abina said. "Come down from our mansion, lived among our people." "We weren't ready," Kwame replied. "We needed to learn too." "And what have we learned?" Kwame considered the question seriously. That wealth can blind us, that power can corrupt, that we need constant reminders of our humanity, or we risk losing it. "And," Abina prompted, knowing there was more, "and that it's never too late to change. For us, for Marcus, for anyone. The capacity for growth is infinite if we're brave enough to face our failures." Below them, Marcus had joined the dancing, looking awkward but happy. Sophia grabbed his hands, teaching him the steps her grandmother had taught her. He laughed, genuine and unguarded, and something in Kwame's heart settled. His son wasn't perfect, would never be perfect, but he was trying, learning, growing. That was enough. That was everything. As the celebration continued into the night, Kwame thought about legacy. For years, he'd believed his legacy would be the company he built, the wealth he accumulated, the empire he'd leave behind. Now he understood that legacy was more than that. It was lives touched, communities strengthened, dignity restored. It was Sophia feeling safe enough to dance. It was Mrs. Chen having hope for her future. It was Amara achieving her dreams despite every obstacle. It was Marcus learning that power wielded with compassion was stronger than power wielded with cruelty. Later, after the celebration ended and the courtyard was quiet again, one final visitor came to apartment 3B. It was a woman Kwame and Abina didn't recognize, middle-aged, professional, with kind eyes. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said. "I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Rebecca Palmer. I work for the city's housing authority." They invited her in, curious. "I've been watching what you've been doing here," Rebecca continued. "The rent reductions, the community programs, the way you've made yourselves accessible to your tenants. It's remarkable." "We're just trying to do right," Abina said. "You're doing more than that. You're modeling something revolutionary, ethical property management that prioritizes people over pure profit." Rebecca leaned forward. "I came to ask if you'd be willing to consult with other property owners to help spread these practices." Kwame and Abina looked at each other. It was more work, more commitment, more vulnerability. But it was also more impact. "On one condition," Kwame said, "Marcus leads the training. He understands the transformation from the inside. He can speak to other owners about why it matters." Rebecca smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." After she left, Abina turned to Kwame. "We're building something bigger than a company." "We're building a movement," Kwame agreed. "One building, one tenant, one relationship at a time." And it all started with an anonymous letter. And a brave young woman who refused to compromise her dignity. They stood together on their balcony, looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, other landlords were exploiting tenants. Other CEOs were crushing employees. Other children were learning from their parents that wealth meant power, and power meant cruelty. But here, in this building, in this community, something different was growing. Something that proved that business could be both profitable and compassionate. That wealth could be a tool for good, not just accumulation. That people in power could choose to use that power to lift others up. It wouldn't change the world overnight, but it was a start. And sometimes a start is all you need. Marcus arrived early the next morning, finding his parents already awake, coffee brewing in their small kitchen. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Too excited," Kwame admitted. "Rebecca Palmer's proposal, it's ambitious." "It's necessary," Marcus corrected. "If we've learned anything, it's that ethical business practices need to be taught, modeled, replicated. Not just here, but everywhere." They spent the morning planning the training program. Marcus would lead workshops for property owners and managers, sharing his own story of transformation. Amara would provide the tenant perspective, humanizing the policies they'd recommend. Mrs. Chen and other residents would share their experiences. It wouldn't be easy. Many property owners would resist, prioritizing short-term profits over long-term community health. But some would listen. Some would change. And those who changed would create ripples, transforming more lives, more communities. "Do you remember what you told me once?" Marcus asked his father. "You said that business was about solving problems, creating value, making lives better." "I remember. I forgot that for a while, got seduced by the numbers, by the power of making decisions that affected people's lives." Marcus shook his head. "But the power isn't in the deciding, it's in the helping." Kwame felt tears prick his eyes. This understanding was worth more than any profit margin. As the sun rose over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, the Okonkwo family stood together on that tiny balcony. Three people who'd learned, painfully and beautifully, that wealth was a responsibility, not just a privilege. Three people who discovered that the truest measure of success wasn't in bank accounts or property holdings, but in lives touched and communities transformed. Three people who'd been given a second chance and had chosen to use it to create second chances for others. Below them, the building woke up. Doors opened. People emerged for their morning routines. Sophia skipped to school, waving up at them. Mrs. Chen swept the stoop, humming. The Colombian family opened their catering business, the smell of fresh empanadas wafting through the air. And Amara, heading to her nursing shift, stopped to look up at apartment 3B. She met Kwame's eyes and smiled, a smile of gratitude, of friendship, of shared purpose. This was home. Not the mansion with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. This tiny apartment, this struggling building, this imperfect community of people trying their best. This was where they belonged, and this was where they'd stay, for as long as they were needed. Because they'd learned the most important lesson of all, that in protecting others, especially from the harm we ourselves might cause, we protect our own humanity, and nothing, absolutely nothing, was more valuable than that.